My body different. I'm breathing different. You understand what I'm saying?
You in here living off my mom's? You getting high in front of Sonny, man? Don't come back no more.
Get shot every day, B. You be aight. You tough, right?
Paid in Full is one of those movies that didn't make much noise when it first came out, but over time, it grew into a cult classic. It's loosely based on the lives of three legendary Harlem drug kingpins, Alpo Martinez, Azie Faison, and Rich Porter.
So I walk up to the table.
Ain't got no soy sauce up there, B? No, they ain't put no soy sauce in the bag, man.
Most people tend to focus on Alpo, who was portrayed as Rico in the film.
You deaf, man. I said we ain't got going on right now, B.
But the stories of the other two are just as compelling. Faison survived being shot 9 times and ended up as the only one of the 3 still alive. And he even became one of the film's producers.
His man come out the room and put the gun to my forehead, and I watched him pull the trigger. And my spirit left the body, bro.
Then there's Rich Porter, whose story ended in betrayal when he was killed by Alpo. Let's dive in deeper, starting off with Rich Porter, portrayed as Mitch in Paid in Full.
I'm sorry about that, all right? I'm sorry about that, man.
Born Richard Thomas Porter in the Harlem section of New York City, Rich was the eldest of 3 children raised by Velma Porter. He grew up with a younger sister named Patricia and a younger brother, William Donald Porter. Rich got his start in the drug game at just 12 years old. Harlem in the 1980s was a breeding ground for street entrepreneurs, and Rich quickly rose through the ranks, becoming one of the most respected and well-known young drug dealers in the area. At first, it was just him and his close friend Azie Faison, who were moving weight and building their name in the streets. But eventually, Alpo Martinez entered the picture. It's widely believed that it was Rich who vouched for Alpo and brought him into the circle. That decision would ultimately come back to haunt him. By the height of his career, Rich Porter had become something of a street legend. He was known for his flashy lifestyle, wearing designer outfits daily, reportedly never repeating an outfit, and keeping a fleet of luxury cars tucked away in a Manhattan garage. He was young, rich, and living fast. But behind all the glamour was a life filled with danger and the constant threat of betrayal. In December of 1989, everything took a devastating turn. On his way to school, Rich's 12-year-old brother William was right in Harlem.
And then Rich Porter's 12-year-old little brother gets
Yes, sir.
So it's just one horrible event after another.
Kidnappers made contact soon after, demanding $500,000 in ransom money. The demand was later reduced to $350,000 in a series of chilling phone calls, handwritten notes, and even a recorded message from William himself. The first messages came through on December 5th and 6th. One of the most disturbing pieces of evidence left by the kidnappers was a coffee cup found in a restaurant bathroom. Inside it was a cassette tape and a severed finger. On the tape, the young boy could be heard crying. "They cut my finger off. Please help, I love you, mommy." It was a moment that shook the entire city, and for Rich, it was personal and terrifying.
And they wanted how much? Like $500,000 or something?
Yeah, that's what it was stated to have been.
And then to show that they were serious, they actually cut off his little brother's
The very
finger.
next day, but they left it in a McDonald's on Broadway in 125th Street and called his house and said there's something to go look, and he sent somebody over there, and that's what they came back with.
But while Rich was trying to figure out how to save his little brother, his own life came to an abrupt and violent end. On January 3rd, 1990, Rich was lured into a meeting with Alpo Martinez. By then, Alpo had grown increasingly paranoid. He suspected Rich was withholding a top-tier cocaine supplier from him, keeping the best product for himself while feeding Alpo second-rate batches. Despite the years they had worked together, the loyalty they'd shared, and the millions they had made, Alpo became convinced Rich had crossed him. According to Alpo's own chilling confession years later, he decided to confront Rich under the guise of a casual meeting. Rich got into a van with him, unaware of what was coming. Alpo locked the doors. As I was pulling off, I was asking him, "Yo, Rich, where did you get that coke from? That ish was good." Alpo later recounted, "Because I wanted to make him comfortable." Moments later, Alpo pulled out a gun and shot him.
I was asking him, like, "Yo, Rich, where did you get that coke from, man? That good, because I wanted to make him comfortable. That good as He's like, "I got it from my connect." I said, "Oh, yeah." So from there, I knew he was lying. I turned to my little man. I gave him the nod. Once I gave him the nod, my little man spent, because he was short so he could stand up in the van. Next thing you heard was the 2 gunshots, bang, bang.
"I was very mad," he admitted in a later interview. "I just killed a dude that I loved, a dude I called my brother." Rich's body was discovered the next day, January 4th, 1990, near Orchard Beach in the Bronx. He had been shot multiple times in the head and chest. Despite the circumstances, police found over $2,000 in cash on him. It was a brutal and senseless murder, made worse by the fact that it came at the hands of someone Rich had brought into the fold. The heartbreak didn't stop there. William, the little brother Rich had desperately tried to save, was never returned. Nearly a month after Rich's death, on January 28, 1990, William's body was found wrapped in 14 layers of plastic bags, dumped near a bike path in the Bronx. A man collecting cans stumbled upon the remains. William had died from a blow to the head. The location was just a mile away from where Rich's body had been discovered, adding yet another eerie and tragic layer to the story. But the most shocking part was that the person responsible for William's murder wasn't a stranger or an outsider. It was his own uncle, Johnny Apple Porter. The brother of Rich and William's mother, Velma, was found to be behind the scheme.
When you heard that out of his mouth, your own uncle killed his own 12-year-old nephew.
Next up is Azie Faison, portrayed as Ace in Paid in Full, the quiet mastermind and the one who would eventually walk away from the drug game with his life, but not without scars.
My body different. I'm breathing different. You understand what I'm saying?
Faison was born on November 10, 1964 in New York City, one of 7 children to Margaret Rogers and Azie Faison Sr. He spent his early years in the Bronx, but at just 6 years old, a fire destroyed their tenement building. The family was forced into a shelter for 6 months before eventually relocating to Harlem, settling in the Sugar Hill section. Like many growing up in tough inner-city conditions, Faison faced challenges early on. He struggled academically and ended up dropping out of high school after the 9th grade. To support himself, he bounced around from job to job, including a 2-year run at a local dry cleaner in Harlem. Everything changed for him in 1983. After watching the now iconic film Scarface, Faison was inspired, if not mesmerized, by the idea of fast money and power. That same year, fate introduced him to a Dominican drug supplier who frequented the dry cleaners. This connection would be his first real step into the trade. By the age of 21, Azie had become a major wholesaler in Harlem, reportedly earning upwards of $40,000 a week. His operation grew fast, fueled by demand and the volatile hunger of the war on drugs era in America. It was during this time that Faison reconnected with his childhood friend Rich Porter, who had just come home from serving time. Rich brought with him a new face, Alpo Martinez. The three quickly formed a powerful alliance, setting up one of the most influential distribution rings in New York at the time. With Azie's connections, Rich's charisma, and Alpo's street presence, the trio dominated the Harlem drug scene through the mid to late 80s. But everything started to fall apart in 1987. On August 21st of that year, Azie became the target of an attempted robbery that nearly ended his life. The incident took place at his aunt's house on 1295 Grand Concourse in the Morrisania section of the Bronx, a location that doubled as one of his stash spots. In the early morning hours, the house was ambushed. The robbery left 3 people dead and 3 others seriously injured. Azie himself was shot a staggering 9 times but somehow survived. Years later, Azie would reveal the setup came from someone he knew personally, Kevin, his sister's boyfriend.
There was 3 people. My sister's boyfriend at the time, he set me up, you understand? Try to rob me.
The motive, according to Azie, stemmed from a situation that had happened before he even got deep into drug dealing. Kevin had once tried to use Azie as a middleman to get drugs to Rich Porter, but Azie didn't trust the setup. Something felt off. So instead of following through, he gave the drugs back to his sister and told her to return them to Kevin. That decision may have planted the seed of resentment.
And it was an incident where he wanted me to give, before he got locked up, he had wanted me to give some drugs to Rich. And I didn't. I gave it back to my sister, and I told him to give it back to him because I felt that dude was crazy, because the situation at that time, he was running from somebody.
The shooting was a turning point. While Azie recovered, the business started to crumble. Trust was broken, and the partnership between Azie, Rich, and Alpo began to deteriorate. Then came the double blow. The murder of Rich Porter in early 1990, followed by the heartbreaking discovery that Rich's 12-year-old brother had also been killed in a separate betrayal. That was it for Azie. He walked away from the drug game for good. After leaving the streets behind, Faison shifted his focus to preventing young people from making the same mistakes he did. In 1989, he formed a rap group called Mob Style, which started with street tales but evolved into a conscious hip-hop group trying to reach and influence the youth. They dropped an album in 1991, and Azie even released a solo project. But music wasn't enough. Azie knew the power of storytelling, so he began working to bring his full story to the screen. He became one of the key forces behind Paid in Full. He also teamed up with the well-known street documentarian Troy Reed to produce a documentary titled Game Over, which gave a raw and detailed look into his life in the drug world. Alongside writer and activist Azie Faison, he co-authored Game Over: The Rise and Transformation of a Harlem Hustler, released in 2007. That same year, the book and documentary were discussed during a panel at the Harlem Book Fair, where Faison's story was highlighted as a real-life example of street life redemption and the urgent need for community intervention. The event featured co-author Ty Himba and even Congressman Charles Rangel, and was broadcast live on C-SPAN's Book TV. And then we have Alpo Martinez, who was portrayed as Rico in the film.
Hey, just get shot every day, B. You be aight. You tough, right?
Born Alberto Geddes Martinez, Alpo grew up in a Puerto Rican household in East Harlem. From a young age, he was fluent in both English and Spanish, something that later gave him a unique edge in the drug game. As a kid, Alpo was full of charisma. He had a slick tongue, a loud laugh, and a way of winning people over. He was one of those kids who always had a scheme, always knew how to hustle, and always seemed to land on his feet no matter what. Even before the streets claimed him, Alpo was already showing signs of being a natural-born hustler. Every summer during his childhood, Alpo left Harlem to participate in the Fresh Air Fund program, a nonprofit that matched inner-city kids with suburban families for a few weeks to give them a break from city life. He stayed with a white family during those summers, and for a while, he got a glimpse of something totally different. Peace, quiet, safety, and a life without gunshots echoing at night. But as soon as summer was over, he was back in Harlem, back in a world that was rapidly changing. By the late 70s and early 80s, Harlem was in the grip of the drug epidemic. Crack was about to explode, and the streets were flooded with opportunity, if you were bold enough to take it. Flashy cars lined the blocks, gold chains swung from necks, and teenage drug dealers were becoming local legends overnight. Young Alpo looked around and knew exactly what he wanted. Not just money, but status, power. He started small, sticking up drug dealers, robbing hustlers for cash and jewelry. But that wasn't enough. Robbing people meant you were always on the move, always a target. Alpo wanted consistency. He wanted to be the man, not the thief, but the supplier. By 1983, he was already making noise in the streets. People knew his name. He was fearless, and that made him dangerous.
Alpo liked good things, nice things, but wow. Get a motorcycle, buy a brand new bike with a crowd as that, do wheelies, crash it, and the next day go buy another motorcycle.
Cops started paying attention, and so did his rivals. That year, he caught his first real charge, but it did little to slow his momentum. Then came 1985. While serving a one-year sentence for a weapons charge, Alpo met someone who would drastically alter the course of his life, Rich Porter. The two clicked, and once Alpo got out, he was determined to level up. That's when he was introduced to Azie Faison. Faison didn't trust Alpo at first. He was unpredictable and had a wild energy that didn't sit right with him. But Rich Porter vouched for him, and in that world, a strong cosign meant everything. Azie took a chance, and Alpo didn't disappoint. He quickly showed his value. Azie began using him as muscle, an enforcer. Alpo was the guy who handled problems. If a rival crew was stepping on their territory or stick-up kids were targeting stash spots, Alpo made sure it stopped. And he didn't just do the dirty work, he loved it. He thrived in that role. He wasn't afraid of violence. In fact, he embraced it as a necessary part of business. As the operation grew, Azie expanded his reach. He moved part of his enterprise to 135th Street and offered Alpo a whole new zone to manage on 145th. Without hesitation, Alpo took it. and made it his. By the mid-1980s, Alpo Martinez had fully cemented himself as a force to be reckoned with in the New York drug trade. No longer the scrappy kid just trying to get a piece of the action, he was now running a full-fledged drug empire alongside his partners. He was out of prison, deeply embedded in Harlem's underworld, and the money was rolling in at an astonishing pace. Alpo and his crew were reportedly making anywhere between $40,000 to $50,000 a week each. But for Alpo, the cash wasn't the ultimate goal. The real prize was the status. Unlike many other drug dealers who kept a low profile to avoid attracting attention from law enforcement or rivals, Alpo embraced the spotlight. His flamboyant nature set him apart. He flaunted his wealth at every turn, decked out in designer clothes, driving luxury cars, and buying customized motorcycles.
Thousands of dollars, 10,000, and just come uptown and light it up. But he liked it, that attention. And in the game, we don't need that. So I was always, oh, this is crazy.
Stories floated around about Alpo doing stunts through Harlem on dirt bikes, speeding through the streets, sometimes kicking police cars just to provoke a chase for fun. But that hunger for attention, what made him a legend in the streets, would also become his Achilles heel. His high-profile antics drew the eye of law enforcement and created tension within his own circle.
Alpo Martinez was an individual that just loved the limelight, and that was what caused a lot of issues.
Me and Rich wanted to stay as low off the radar as much as possible. But for some reason, he couldn't understand that, man.
By the late 1980s, cracks began to form in the relationship between the three of them. What was once a partnership built on trust, money, and loyalty slowly deteriorated under the weight of paranoia and greed. Eventually, this mistrust led Alpo to make a cold, calculated decision to have Rich killed. With Rich gone and the streets of Harlem getting hotter by the day, Alpo made a move that would shift his entire trajectory. He headed south to Washington, D.C., taking his game to the capital. Alpo quickly embedded himself in D.C.'s drug trade and began building a new empire. But with his move came a change in tactics. He became even more ruthless, more paranoid, more violent. In D.C., eliminating threats before they could even breathe. He became infamous for the sheer number of people tied to his name. Rumors of murders, intimidation, and executions followed him like a shadow. Law enforcement took notice. For years, federal agents and police departments across multiple states had been quietly building a case against him. They knew he was connected to numerous murders and large-scale drug operations, but they needed airtight evidence. Still, the body count continued to rise, and whispers on the street painted Alpo as someone who had no lines left to cross. Exactly how many people Alpo had killed remains uncertain to this day, but one thing was clear. His reign wasn't going to last forever. On November 7th, 1991, the same day Magic Johnson stunned the world with his HIV diagnosis, the walls finally closed in on Alpo. After a lengthy investigation and manhunt, the FBI captured him in southeast Washington, D.C. His arrest was a major takedown, one of the biggest blows to the East Coast drug trade at the time. The once flamboyant kingpin was now facing the grim reality of life behind bars, with multiple charges stacked against him, including murder, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. But Alpo wasn't ready to disappear into a cell. Faced with the possibility of dying in prison, he flipped. He cooperated with federal authorities and became an informant. Alpo began naming names, giving up high-level associates, detailing drug routes, and testifying against some of the very people he once ran the streets with. His testimony helped put away several of his former allies and business partners. In return, the government offered him a deal. Instead of spending the rest of his life in prison, he received a sentence of 35 years. After serving roughly 24 years, he was released in 2015 and placed in the Federal Witness Protection Program, where he assumed a new identity and tried to live quietly. But Alpo could never fully leave the streets behind. He eventually returned to Harlem, despite the countless enemies and unresolved bloodshed he had left in his wake. On October 31st, 2021, Halloween night, Alpo Martinez's past finally caught up with him. While sitting in his Dodge Ram truck near Frederick Douglass Boulevard in Harlem, he was shot multiple times in a drive-by attack.